Hey, good morning, everybody. Today's Monday and it's May 4th, and I realized I made a note of it, and it seems like there's some practice SAT that is going to happen today for juniors. So good luck to you guys. Um, I'm curious to hear what it'll be like. And so, therefore, we won't be having class at the usual time, but I thought I'm going to make a video kind of summarizing some of the things that I think were important from class last week as we are moving into this new text, the importance of being earnest. Um, and I'm looking at a version in iBooks here that is free. And if you've never used iBooks before, there's some pretty interesting features. I like the way that you can kind of make a little note about something. And I'll make a note here, John Worthing, JP. I believe that's a degree for being a lawyer, but I'd have to check that out. Let me actually just do that right now. Oops, I have to find my little thing here. Okay, yeah, JP, short for Justice of the Peace. Won't go into too much detail about the history of that title, and there's certainly a little well to drill in order to extract some meaning out of why is it that John Worthing is of that particular occupation. It certainly would mean something. I'm not going to go into that. What I want to do, though, is try to get everyone set up on the plot structure here. Just like Shakespeare, it's really easy to get lost if you don't have the characters down. And one thing important to know that John also, if you're named John, typically, especially in the old days, Jack was the nickname that you had. So you were going to see John Worthing being referred to as Jack, Jack Worthing. Jack, or John, we'll call him Jack, is also Earnest. But Earnest, the name Earnest, is not spelled with that A. And so he's sort of maybe the main protagonist, and he's got a very prominent sidekick, Algernon. Algernon is short for algae. Again, I'm just sort of using the note feature here in iBooks just to show you the way that I will sometimes like to use the notes feature in iBooks if you've never done that before. It can be really great too, especially if you are wanting to find a quote that you had highlighted at some point. You can go into the notes and just find them really easily. You can also search for keywords very quickly. I'm sure some of you know this already. I'm surprised Bunbury is not. Am I not spelling it right? There he is, yeah. A Bunburyist. That's something I want to talk to Bunbury. If you were in class, you kind of know what I'm talking about. We're going to get into that also. So there's an important move that occurs in the beginning of the play, having a lot to do with the identity of these two characters. John or Jack Worthing, also known as Earnest, and Algie Moncrief. And we find out that they both have, they're both playing around with what their identities are. And they both do it in similar but different ways. They have different strategies for doing that. And why do they want to do that? Because they're bachelors. They want to have fun. They've got, and Oscar Wilde is kind of making fun of the sort of upper middle class or the wealthy class aristocracy and the way that they spend their time and the lengths that they kind of go to perpetuate their liberties in a way that fits within a very strict cultural system or a society of the Victorian era that was full of different rules and full of a lot of social obligations and a lot of propriety mannerisms, doing things a proper way. And so their these identities that they have created help them sort of get around all of these sort of social obligations that they're kind of required to like go through the motions of. I'm gonna pause for just 1 second. Okay, so as I was saying, it's important then to make sure we understand um, the reveal that occurs at the beginning of the first act, in which Algae, and I'll show you a picture. I'm going to use a couple of different versions of the film adaptation of the play. But the big reveal occurs in the beginning, in which Algae realizes that Jack is not real. Algae only knows Jack as Earnest. And we find out that Jack has this dual identity in which he lives in the country, and in the country he's known as John or Jack. But when he comes into London, he is known as Earnest. And Algae is from London, and he has only known Jack as Earnest. And then he finds out, oh, wait a minute, you have this other life in the country. Oh, tell me about that. Guess what? I do the same kind of thing. I have invented this character who's fictional, whose name is Bunbury. And Bunbury is this old man. Again, he's fake, okay, but he's an old man who's constantly getting sick. And so anytime I need an excuse to get out of something, I'll just say, I've got to go take care of my invalid friend Bunbury, who is really sick again. And so that's his like excuse to kind of get out of any kind of obligation that he wants. Here is this a film version of it in which this is Algae here, and this is Ernest, aka Jack.
Cecily? Goodness, do you mean? What do you mean, Algae, by Cecily? I don't know anyone by the name of Cecily. Do you mean to say you have had my cigarette case all this time?
Now, the reason Algae knows in the beginning of the play, Ernest has left a cigarette case, and Algae finds it and says, "Hey, I got your cigarette case. And by the way, who's Cecily, and why is she calling you Jack?" And Ernest / Jack.
Goodness, you had let me know. I've been writing frantic letters to Scotland Yard about it. I was very nearly offering a very large reward.
Right now, he's a little nervous because his cover's being blown, and Algae's got him trapped. And Algae causes him then to come out with the true nature of his identity, in which he's both Ernest in the city and also Jack in the country. And then Algae goes on to say, and here, let me just jump to a play version, which I also find pretty good. This is probably more accurate than the movie version.
It is. Now, produce your explanation, and pray make it improbable. My dear fellow, there is nothing improbable about my explanation at all. In fact, it's perfectly ordinary.
So here is Algae, and this is Ernest, who is in trouble with Algae right now because Algae's saying, "Oh, I got the cigarette case, okay." And it says that your name is not Ernest, it's Jack, and by the way, who is Cecily?
Old Mr. Thomas Cardew, who adopted me when I was a little boy, made me in his will guardian to his granddaughter, Miss Cecily Cardew. Cecily, who addresses me as uncle, from motives of respect you could not possibly appreciate, lives at my place in the country under the charge of her admirable governess, Miss Prison.
Where is that place in the country, by the way?
That is nothing to you, dear boy. You are not going to be invited. I may tell you.
Why does Algae want to know where his place is? Well, he's interested in this young Cecily from the get-go. And Jack wants to keep Algae from him. Why? Because he knows he's a player. But that's sort of some foreshadowing of a plot line that will develop a little bit later on. Let me pause for 1 second. Okay, so now that Algae knows that about Jack / Ernest's dual identity, Algae's going to say, "Oh, you know what? I always thought you were a Bunburyist." Bunburyist is a very weird word, okay? Again, it relates to I explained it a minute ago. Bunbury is this friend that he has created to use as an excuse to rearrange his social obligations and to, I won't repeat what I said, but this is where Algie will explain his strategy with Bunbury and what he calls Bunburying. He even takes the name and turns it into a verb and even a noun.
Truth is rarely pure and never simple.
Great
What
quote.
you really are is a Bunburyist. He was quite right in saying you were a Bunburyist. You're one of the most advanced Bunburyists I know.
What on earth do you mean?
You have invented a very useful younger brother called Earnest in order that you may be able to come up to town as often as you like. I have invented an invaluable permanent invalid called Bunbury in order that I may be able to go down to the country whenever I choose. Bunbury is perfectly invaluable. If it wasn't for Bunbury's extraordinary bad health, for instance, I wouldn't be able to dine with you at Willis's tonight, for I've been really engaged to Aunt Augusta for more than a week.
I haven't asked you to dine with me anywhere tonight.
I know you.
Okay, so there you have it, said better than I could say it. So super important then to know this setup about Algie using Bunbury and Ernest and Jack wrapped up, and they use their different personalities, one for the city, one for the country. And so here we have in Act 1, Act 1, there's 3 acts. And in Act 1, this is the dialogue that you have, that we just read. Tell me the whole thing. I may mention that I've always suspected you of being a confirmed and secret Bunburyist. I am quite sure of it now. What on earth do you mean? I revealed to you the meaning of that incomparable expression as soon as you were kind enough to inform me why you were Ernest in town and Jack in the country. And so on. So anyway, just connecting the text here with the play. And it's also recommended, that you kind of conjure up the imagery of these two characters. And maybe you want to use some faces from the movie or the play in order to visualize. I think that's very helpful when reading it. And also, it doesn't hurt to, you could even substitute some of the reading too, because really with the film, especially the one on YouTube that I just was playing, I'll link that on the class page, because and you just, all you get is text here. We went through this with Shakespeare, so it's important to sort of dress up what the text is with some imagery of our own, and so you're kind of directing the play in your own brain, if you wanted to. Okay, the final point to make is something sort of thematic. And now that we've gotten this concept of the dual identities sort of fleshed out a little bit, and how that appears in Act 1, and it's presented, and you have to catch it and really take it in and understand it. The play is a comedy, and there's a lot of absurdities. There's some great lines. In fact, almost every line contains a joke if you're clever enough to decipher it. I'm not quite that clever, but the more it's one of those things you can read it again and again and still get something out of it. Almost like The Office too. If you look at really good TV shows that are continuously funny for you, you'll realize the jokes that they pack into each set of dialogue is, there's a lot of jokes happening packed into one place. It takes a lot of skill and craft to do that. So that's something that we see in Earnest. And now, there's another thing, another text called Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde that was almost concurrent, I think, it was a contemporary work, a short novel, and of the horror genre in a way. Also a little science fiction-y. Now, we talked a little about the emergence of the sci-fi genre too. Something I really encourage. It doesn't hurt to go and read it. It doesn't take long. It's a really wonderful story. But I bring it up because it helps us understand, well, why are these two different authors, Oscar Wilde, who writes The Importance of Being Earnest, and Robert Louis Stevenson, who has written Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. They're both dealing with this problem of identity and how there's the side that's acceptable for culture and society, and then there's a side that's sort of in the shadows that has to kind of be manipulative and secretive, and it's very playful and earnest. It's a little ominous in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Now, why is this something that authors are wanting to explore? And I always am going back to this idea that authors, artists, hold up a mirror to the culture that they are writing from. And there's something about the Victorian culture, okay, I think, which is personified here by Dr. Jekyll, who's a fine, upstanding man. Okay, he's a doctor, he's a well-respected scientist, and he actually is got good intentions, and he wants to try to create this sort of like super drug, for lack of a better term. And but in doing so, he goes down a dark path in which he gets consumed every time he takes this drug to do the self experiments. He gets taken over by this beast within, and it gets a little more complicated. But so he's flipping back and forth between the acceptable persona, the acceptable identity for the Victorian era, and then he can't help but be pulled back into this shadowy, dark, kind of unacceptable, evil, overly passionate, aggressive, something that, this sort of identity that says, forget everything, forget the laws, forget the rules, I'm going to do whatever I want, and it doesn't even matter. So what these artists are trying to say is that, and this is my opinion, but I think that there's a good argument to be made that when we create rules, decorum, laws, social structures, hierarchies, that we have to leave behind our innate desires. We have to repress, perhaps, and this is something Freud talked about later on, but we have to push away and push out that which is not acceptable. But the more we push it out and try to repress it or suppress it, then the more we might get a phenomenon in which that which has been suppressed is coming back out again. And so with Algy and Jack, we see them fulfilling their discarded selves by making up the Bunbury figure, or making up a dual identity, Jack and Ernest. And in Victorian society, certainly that was going on. There was this belief that everything was all prim and proper and wonderful and tidy and optimistic. But actually, the culture was quite fragile. And the turn of the century was upon the UK and the rest of the world that followed that calendar. There was a tremendous amount of anxiety, as we talked about in the earlier screencasts and slideshows. And the Victorian culture was not as stable and fixed and strong. It was beginning to crack and crumble, and was something that was very delicate and superficial. And when it starts to crack and crumble, this is what can emerge. And we've got to come to terms with this. I think, these artists and authors, or at least recognize what that is. Because guess what comes down the pipe in the historical timeline after the 1890s? Okay, you've got what is termed the Age of Anxiety and World War I, and a lot of very challenging scientific ideas, the creation of atomic energy. So civilization really hits a kind of crossroads in which we start losing our collective innocence, perhaps. Okay, I won't carry on any longer. That's class for today. It's about 20 minutes long. Again, this is a wrap up of some things that we brought up and discussed last week. And if you were not in all the classes discussions, this will certainly get you caught up to speed. And if you were in class, and I recommend, yeah, this will just hopefully have reinforced what we talked about, and maybe I articulated it a little bit more clearly as well, and packed it all in. So, all right, I will see you guys on Tuesday.